Hi everyone, I'm Professor Burgasser, and in this video we're going to be looking at contact forces, the forces that arise when two surfaces come into contact with each other. Now, these forces are the normal and friction force, and they play a big role in how two objects move when they come into contact with each other. Now, as I mentioned earlier, Newton's third law really tells us that forces are interactions. If one object acts on a second object, the second object is also going to act on the first object. These forces are equal in magnitude, but opposite in direction. So there's no isolated forces. All forces happen in these pairs, these action-reaction pairs. And often those interactions happen because of the contact between these two surfaces. So for example, in this picture, the surface that is the surface of the hand in contact with the surface of the car. At that place, we're going to see contact forces operate. Now there's two different forces that act at these surfaces, and they act perpendicular to each other. The normal force is a force that acts perpendicular to the surface, and it's a support force. It will hold an object up if, for example, a glass is on a table. It will also constrain the motion of an object to stay along that surface. That's the role of the normal force. The friction force acts perpendicularly, and it acts along the surface of these two, in the direction of the surface between these two objects, and it's always acting in the direction opposite of either the motion or the potential motion. It's what we call a dissipative force, and it essentially tries to prevent or slow down the motion of two surfaces relative to each other. So to see how this normal force works, let's look at the example of this mug sitting on this box here. Now the mug has a contact between the box at the surfaces of the bottom of the mug and the top of the box, and that's where our normal force is going to be acting. Now, in this case, we're going to focus on the mug, and keeping in mind that the normal force acts away from the surface and perpendicular to the surface, that means that the normal force of the box acting on the mug is pushing the mug upwards. That is an upward normal force. Now, at the same time, the mug has a mass, and being near the surface of the earth, it's going to have a weight, which is going to pull it down. And if these two force vectors, the weight and the normal force, are equal to each other and opposite in their direction, the sum of those forces are zero, and you're going to have an object that's at rest, at least vertically, and that's exactly what we see here. The cup's not moving. Now keep in mind that that weight force vector and the normal force vector are not action-reaction pairs. They may be equal in magnitude in opposite direction, but they're not actually Newton's third law action-reaction pairs. The weight is the earth acting on the cup. The normal force is the box acting on the cup. So to figure out what the action-reaction pair, we just have to flip those actors around. It's going to be the action of the cup acting on the box and in the opposite direction, and that's a force that's pushing the box downwards. Now, normal forces don't necessarily have to act in this sort of vertical direction. Anytime you have two objects that come into contact at a surface, you're going to have a normal force. So for example, when you're painting a wall, the normal force is going to act on the paintbrush out of the wall and on the wall inward toward the wall. And if you give a high five to someone, of course, you're exerting a normal force on each other through your contact of your hands. And you can feel that when you give a high five. Now, the normal force doesn't always have to equal the weight force. In the case where an object is stationary, of course, that's going to be true because the sum of the forces have to equal zero so that you have no acceleration. But if for some terrible accident this box starts to fall down, then the normal force is going to be reduced because you want to have a net acceleration of the cup downward. And so the magnitude of the normal force is really that force that counteracts the applied forces in the system up to the point where you have a net acceleration or a net mass times acceleration. Now, of course, you can also remove the cup from the box, in which case there is no more contact surface, and that eliminates the normal force entirely. Now, our second contact force is the force of friction, and this is the force that acts along the surface of two surfaces, parallel to those surfaces, and acts in a way to counter any relative motion between those surfaces, any sliding motion. So if I have two blocks like this, the friction force is acting in a way to resist the motion of pushing this block along the top here. All right, as the velocity of the block goes this way, the friction force is pointing in the opposite direction on this block. And of course, there's an action-reaction pair, so as the friction force slows the block down in this direction, there's an equal and opposite force acting on the bottom block in the opposite direction as there's relative motion in this way. Now, the friction force is an interesting one because it does act to counteract motion, but it also acts to counteract the potential for motion. So if I apply a small amount of force on this top block, even though it's not moving, friction is still applied because if it wasn't there, I would have an acceleration of this top block. So somehow friction is able to figure out which way to point based on the applied force and prevent motion in that direction by pointing the opposite direction. Now, if we look at friction on a microscopic scale, it mostly comes from the surface roughness between two surfaces. Now, this roughness can be on a macroscopic level, for example, in sandpaper or felt, or it can be on a microscopic scale. Things that feel perhaps very, very smooth, such as a cue ball, is going to be still rough on the molecular scale. And it's the roughness on the molecular scale that gives rise to this resistive force. It's essentially the rubbing of these two surfaces with respect to that roughness will give rise to a resistive force. Now, the amount of that friction force, that rubbing force, is going to depend on the amount of contact area between these two surfaces. So as we squeeze these two materials together, you're going to get a stronger, tighter connection. You're going to get more contact as these rough edges are pushed together, which means you're going to get a stronger friction force. So the friction force depends on how tightly two objects are squished together, but in fact that's exactly the same as our normal force. So let's go back to our cup on our box. If I apply a force to the cup, that's not enough to start it moving. That means there must be a friction force acting in the opposite direction. And indeed, the force that I'm pushing is this way. The friction force must be acting in the opposite direction. The sum of the forces equals 0. I've got a cup that stays essentially stationary. But if I push this cup a little bit harder, I'm able to start accelerating it. And the magnitude of the acceleration is just the difference in the forces between what I apply and the friction force divided by the mass. Now, interesting in this situation, when I actually have these two things sliding, that friction force turns out to be a constant force. And that constant force depends on two terms. One, the normal force, the amount of squeezing between the surfaces, and a conversion factor, or a coefficient, that's out in front. We call this the coefficient of friction. And that's the number that converts normal force to friction force. So we can see that these are related. So if I make a plot showing the applied force to this cup versus the amount of friction force it's counteracting, we would see something like that shown here, where the applied force as it increases is exactly matched by the friction force up until some maximum threshold point, and that's equal to the coefficient of static friction times the normal force. All right, that is the maximum amount of friction force that can resist motion. Now beyond that point, there's a little bit of a hiccup down where the constant force is actually a little bit smaller, and that's equal to the coefficient of kinetic friction times the normal force. And in general, the coefficient of static friction is just a little bit larger than the coefficient of kinetic friction. This is why when you're trying to get something to move, there's a little bit of an extra push you have to get it before it starts to slide. At that point, then kinetic friction takes over, and it's a little bit smaller of a friction force value. Now these coefficients of static and kinetic friction are tabulated in various places, and so here's a list of some common surfaces. Notice that they're all listed by the two surfaces that are in contact. Because it's the force that acts between the two surfaces, you have to actually specify which two surfaces you're talking about when you actually measure these coefficients of friction. And they have a very wide range. You have very strong friction forces that happen, for example, between rubber and concrete. That's one of the reasons why we use rubber on our tires. That's so we can keep a nice high friction as we're going around turns. But we also have cases where we have very low friction. For example, synovial joints, which are the joints of your elbow and your shoulder and your knee, basically your major joints in your body, have extremely low coefficients of friction. And that's in part because they are there's fluid inside those joints called synovial fluid, and those basically reduce the friction force by reducing the contact. They fill in the spaces between these two surfaces and reduce the friction between those surfaces. And that's pretty important because if we had a lot of friction in our joints, it'd be very difficult to move around. Now the direction of friction is an important thing to consider because it will depend on not just the actual motion but also potential motion. And it's important to think about what the motion is going to be without friction in order to figure out which way that friction force is actually pointed. So a common example is look at a block on an inclined plane and consider which way the friction force acts in that case. If we start this block at rest, of course it has a weight term that's acting downwards, and at the surface itself we're going to have a normal force acting perpendicular to the surface, so that's going to point upwards. And now we have to figure out which way friction is pointing. Now in the absence of friction, one can just imagine this block is just going to slide right down the inclined plane. And so that's our expected motion. That means the friction force is going to have to act in the opposite direction. Now that's the case of a block starting at rest. Let's say I kick this block up the inclined plane. In that case, the actual motion is upwards along the inclined plane, and friction force again has to resist the motion, the relative motion between these surfaces, and so friction force is going to act downward down the plane. So it's important to think carefully about which way two objects are going to slide relative to each other in order to decide the direction of that friction force. Now a more complicated example is the case of rolling friction, when we have an object that's rolling across the surface of a floor or a table. In that case, when we think about friction, we have to really be very careful about the fact that it's measuring the relative motion of the two surfaces that are in contact. So if I have a wheel here that is moving off to the side at constant velocity v and is also rolling at an angular rate omega, I can look at what are the forces acting at the contact point, which I've labeled right here. So of course we have the weight of the wheel that's pulling it downward, and the normal force that the table is acting on the wheel that's pushing it upwards. But which way does friction act? Well, this will depend a lot on the difference between the velocity and the angular velocity of the actual surface at that point. And remember, the angular velocity is the angular rate times the radius. So we can measure the relative velocity by looking at both of these vectors together. Again, the whole wheel is moving off to the side, so that's going to give us a velocity at that surface contact of our linear velocity. But then the surface is acting in such a way as to rotate the surface in the opposite direction, right? So that means that the angular velocity, the velocity at that point, is going to actually point in the opposite direction as the motion. Well, of course, it depends on which way the wheel is actually spinning. So if we want to actually calculate the relative velocity, we have to add these vectors together, which means in a one-dimensional sense we're subtracting the angular velocity from the linear velocity, or the angular speed from the linear speed, which means that the actual relative velocity is going to depend on the linear speed minus the radius times the angular rate. So the friction force is going to depend on what these two quantities are. And there's of course three cases. You could have one where the linear motion of the wheel is much faster than the spinning motion. So for example, that would be the case of maybe a ball or a wheel that's just sliding without spinning. In that case, the friction force is going to act to slow down that speed, that motion, and increase the rotation rate of the wheel. So it's going to act in the opposite direction of motion. On the other hand, if you have a wheel that's spinning faster than the actual speed of the wheel, right, that's a case where the wheel is slipping, then in fact the friction force is going to act in the opposite direction. It's going to act in the direction of linear motion, and it's actually going to act to slow down the spinning of the wheel. And of course the most interesting case is when you have these two terms equal to each other, which would be the case of a wheel just rolling along a flat surface. In that case, at the very point of contact, there's no difference between that linear motion and that rotational motion, and so the total friction force at that point is zero. We call this rolling without friction. So to summarize, when we have two surfaces that are in contact with each other, we have two forces that we have to consider: a normal force that acts perpendicular to the surface, and a friction force that acts along the surface. That normal force is there to constrain the motion, and it's always going to act perpendicularly away from the surface. And in most cases, if you have a case where an object is not falling through a surface or falling out of a surface, you have the case where the normal force will equal all of the vertically applied forces if it's a vertical problem. But of course, if there's a net acceleration, you have to take into account the difference in the normal force to allow for that acceleration. In the case of friction force, that force is acting parallel to the surfaces, and it's always going to act in the direction opposite of the relative motion between the surfaces or the potential relative motion. And so in the direction in which it will prevent any relative motion from happening. And so if there is no relative motion, it's going to prevent it by pointing in the opposite direction of all the other forces up to a limiting point, which is the static coefficient of friction times a normal force. That's the case if it's not slipping. If it is slipping, then friction has a constant magnitude, which is the kinetic coefficient of friction times the normal force. And keep in mind the kinetic coefficient of friction is often less than the static coefficient of friction. So it's important to keep track of which coefficient you need to use, whether it's a slipping case or a non-slipping case. And finally, with friction force, you have to be very careful to think about which way is that friction force going to act. Imagine the problem without friction, and that will tell you which way the friction force has to act to prevent relative motion between two surfaces.